Hello! Our story begins inside the Jedi Council chambers, with a discussion of actual intelligence. The minds of the greatest collection of elders in the Order finally, after years, combined their 3 collective brain cells for a topic of interest. Following the recent events surrounding the bombing of the Coruscant power grid and the assassination of Separatist Senator Mina Bonteri, the Jedi realized something. Hey, you remember that guy named Dooku? Do you also remember the sect he serves called the Sith? And how that specific sect likes to wage war for fun? Surely the death of Mina Bonteri and the bombing of the Coruscant power grid are linked, right? Why would the Republic willingly assassinate a senator for the other side trying to end the war? These truly are conundrums. Something one might expect the Jedi to think about. Well, today, they actually did. Yoda listened to his peers, and as if he had an epiphany, he realized, maybe Dooku isn't that good of a guy. I mean, after he cut off Anakin's wrist, fired electricity, used a red lightsaber, and started a war, surely he'd come around eventually, right? It's not like those weren't identifiable traits of being a Sith. The Jedi Council really, finally, after a year of full combat, put it together. The war would never truly come to an end if they didn't, force their hand. The Sith wanted conflict, and even if the Clone War wasn't a Sith-related battleground, people were still dying. The war dogs were getting richer by the day, and no one did a thing about ending the conflict. The truth in all of this is that the Jedi should have recognized this since day one. Their first motive should have been taking out Dooku, and allowing the Separatists to realize that he wasn't any different than the oligarchs that ran the Republic. But I guess stopping a galactic-scale war that had already costed billions of lives was too generous. Who knows, it could be a PR nightmare for the Jedi Order if they just ended the war. As the counselors were collecting their thoughts, one of their peers suggested a move. If the war was being manipulated by Dooku, then they should force Chancellor Palpatine to end the conflict. Even with the Coruscant power grid collapsing and repairs just getting underway, the Republic needed to be the one to end the war. Currently, the Jedi had very little reason to suspect that Palpatine was the Sith Lord, so their main line of focus was just simply stopping the bloodshed. Many of the Jedi inside these chambers had watched clones die, seen citizens slaughtered, enslaved, starved, and even worse, not to mention scorched earth on numerous planets. This was a real war with real casualties, and while solving bureaucracy would never be easy, it was a whole lot better than pretending it would resolve itself. The Jedi had watched the Republic dig its heels in further and further since Geonosis. With the terrible failures and losses consuming the clone army at the beginning of the war, the Republic was pretty much in a position to lose the struggle. At this current point, the tides were evening out. The Outer Rim sieges were about another year away from starting, and the Republic was mobilized for conflict. This was the perfect time to end the war. If they could just bring the Separatists and Republic together through Palpatine, it would be the perfect route. One of the counselors even suggested that they frame it in a positive light for Palpatine. Like, think of how popular he would be for ending one of the most catastrophic events in recent memory. He'd be a hero for the rest of his life. Another member countered though. Palpatine could also be seen as a coward for trying to weasel his way out of the war. Their discussions continued. Ideas and counter-arguments frustrated many members within their tiny hall. They had the right idea, and finally, had somewhere worth putting their thoughts, but tackling Palpatine would be difficult. Just because they didn't think he was a Sith Lord didn't mean they held a great respect or trust for him. He was in year 3 after his term should have expired. The Separatist crisis that he kinda made worse with policy and executive orders furthered them from the Republic. As the Jedi figured, it had to be Palpatine who extended this olive branch. Senators Amidala and Bonteri did a fine job, but it had to come from one of the heads of state. And under the known truth that both Dooku and his shadowy master Sidious served the Confederacy, they wouldn't be the ones to try and end the war. Due to their meeting going late into the evening, a squad of counselors would be assigned executive duty for the following day. This collection came with Yoda, Mace, Ki-Adi-Mundi, Obi-Wan, and Adi Gallia. Their meeting with the Chancellor wasn't exactly hostile, closer to a luncheon. They sat down and they talked about what Dooku was. Palpatine said something he typically said, they suggested executive action, and the Chancellor just blew it off. Palpatine, the politician, had heard about the Sith before from the Jedi. He was aware what Dooku was because of young Skywalker, but he simply had no interest in ending the conflict. If anything, this led to Palpatine's greatest counter. If Dooku was willing to kill off one of the great senators of his own government just to keep the war going, then what difference would it make if Palpatine tried to extend an olive branch? The Separatists wouldn't want to hear anything from him, and the truth had already been muddled. He turned his holopad around and showed the Jedi newly released propaganda about the clones. The Separatists were engulfed in a culture war started by Dooku, one that held no precedent over the galaxy, or the reality of it. Palpatine told the Jedi that their virtues were aligned properly. They had the hearts that were needed to mend the galaxy. But after the war, he promised them that once the conflict ends, he would use them to ensure conflict never happens again. How sick it was for the Jedi, and pleasant for Palpatine, that he could gloat about using them for his PR to make an Imperial military so large that nothing in the known galaxy could challenge it. He smiled softly, counting down the days till the war ended in his head, and thanked them for their time. The Jedi didn't resist, and they got up to leave the executive chambers. Well, that was a day's work. Time to return to meditation and complacency. The following day, the events inside the executive offices would be displayed for the rest of the High Council. They all felt a little wounded over the discussion. Each member truly felt like they had conjured the winning strategy. Telling Palpatine to end the war may have not been the most ethical thing, but the Chancellor supported his claims reasonably. The Jedi had no idea how to move forward from here. They could go back to fighting battles, losing troopers, and letting civilians die by the thousand per day, or they could return to the executive office and demand change. That perhaps was the growing problem for the Jedi Order. They simply refused to make the effort to change the Republic. Their complacency was costing lives every single day. So, as Master Yoda subtly proposed leaving the politics of the galaxy up to the politicians, another one of his peers interjected. They couldn't just surrender the galaxy so easily. The Senate was pushing the conflict to further escalation. While the counselors were speaking to Palpatine the previous day, Master Peel overheard from one of his Senate contacts that there were members of Palpatine's coalition preparing to introduce a military expansion bill that, with the added interest rates from the banking clans, could see the Republic facing unprecedented debt. Prior to the conflict, the Republic hadn't really accumulated a large deficit. This war had done more than enough damage in just a few long months. An interest rate like this could absolutely destroy the Republic. Not only were the Separatists getting a 25% interest rate, which was incredibly high, but another rumor floating about was an increase in the rates from the banking clans. Without any other major banking system in the galaxy, the rumor suggested that the clans would maximize their profits by extending their rates to 50% interest, just to screw over the Republic. As a business decision, it was really sound. The Republic needed to maintain competitiveness in the war, and the banking clan was the only place to take a loan out that large. Not to mention, the Republic was a far larger government than the CIS. They could foot the bill in the long run if need be. That comes back to the Jedi though. If they didn't make a move now, then the entire war would not only ruin the galaxy, but set society back generations with an unending deficit. All the children growing up in today's war would pay the price for something they could not control, vote about, or even know about. That didn't even include the radical change in prices for everyday people that would surely soar after the elongated conflict that could damage supply lines and trade relationships. Putting all of this into perspective for the High Council gave them a hefty burden. They could either continue being themselves and let this unfold, or they could change the fate of everything by simply acting forcefully. Well, similarly to the first conversation, it would not go anywhere. A sizable number of counselors visited the Chancellor, and they forcefully told him to end the war. It was a little more contentious, and the elder politician felt cornered, so he fought back. He told the Jedi that they had no purpose interfering in his affairs. This war needed to be won, and if the Republic needed additional troops in a bill package, then he would fully support it, because they would not lose. He also told them that if they continued this radicalized behavior of trying to interject into his policy stances and his burden of defending the galaxy, then he would make an official proposed amendment to the Constitution. The Jedi didn't have the leverage that they thought they did. The counselors may have come with a fire, but Palpatine had a tidal wave that could sweep any hope they had away. In this, he threatened to cut all their funding, remove their protections, and basically turn a private religious entity into an unofficial sect in the heart of the Republic, with unchecked powers. He cited the external reviews started by Rayancourt over a century before. Imagine that review, but 10 times worse. Imagine a Jedi Order reporting directly to the Chancellor's office, funding that got approved by bureaucrats, and a budget completely controlled by the Republic Defense Committee. That was their choice, autonomy or none. They could continue to do this if they wanted, but their autonomy would forever be stripped away from them. Unless, of course, they wanted to go rogue. Then in that case, they would be treated as the late Mandalorians were. Remember how that war went? With thousands of Mandalorians dying by Republic hands? Right. Palpatine laid his foot down on their neck and proceeded to apply pressure with every new sentence. The counselors were given that final warning by Palpatine. He was tired of them barging into his offices and interrupting his wartime debriefings with duplicitous thoughts of grandeur. This was no longer their republic, and he reminded them how far their autonomy had been allowed to persist. That status quo could be changed with a snap of his fingers. With a real, legitimate threat from the Chancellor, one heard by Masameda also in the room, the witness, the Jedi Council frustratedly sat with this fate. If they went too far again, they could damage their public reputation indefinitely. Palpatine was being generous by not totally throwing them under the bus. He could go public with this information, and yes, Palpatine had every single session recorded, so he could actually show the public if he wanted, but that wasn't within his plan yet. The Sith Lord in disguise was simply waiting for his time to come, the moment where he could uproot the Jedi. But right now, and as the Council saw him, he was a stressed elderly man. He was a wartime general, leading his armies from the capital, and maintaining public trust in government. In the scenario where Palpatine wasn't a Sith Lord, he had every reason to be as stressed as he was. A regular man facing a droid army with growing numbers, lost battles every other day, citizens dying, public desire for conflict dropping, economic turmoil, and basically a full-blown galactic civil war. In that scenario, and what the Jedi currently believe Palpatine to be at this moment was, they kind of understood his outburst, but that still didn't change the fact that the war was still going on. So what do you do when the galaxy's about to crumble, when your only hope for resolution is taking a hold of the galactic government and forcing peace? Well, you get more aggressive. The Jedi put it to a vote inside their own chambers. This decision could cost them everything. As a precautionary member, Jocasta Nu took the younglings, all of them, on a surprise field trip to Dantooine to visit one of the ancient Jedi temples, long lost to time. Everyone under the age of 16 accompanied her. Those between the ages of 16 and 20 inside the temple were given the option to leave if they wished. This was a vote that the council went off of, and it was overwhelmingly in favor to taking the executive power with force. Some other minor councils within the temple were also added to this vote. Master of the Order Mace Windu made a point to speak to as many trusted Jedi as possible about this, so that they didn't make this decision without the entire Order's approval. This, in all actuality, might have been the most binding moments for the Jedi in recent history. It was a collective vote throughout the entire Order. There were those that thought maybe this was going too far, but seriously, what else were they supposed to do to end the conflict? The Chancellor just theoretically threatened them with his executive power, in a moment for Palpatine that depicted his grip over the Senate and genuinely put fear into the Council, also became the turning point of Jedi unity. The Council also didn't sugarcoat the event. They displayed how they felt about it openly, and they also didn't appreciate the threat from the Chancellor openly too. Everything was displayed for the Order. The Jedi who voted, which accounted for about 75% of the adult Order, overwhelmingly agreed with taking over the executive power. Everyone was given 24 hours to fill in their vote and help the Council decide. Mostly everyone thought it was a valid decision to challenge the Chancellor. If he planned on taking power from them like that, then he needed some checks and balances applied. The Council, as a result of the vote, mobilized. Not every member of their council had been on Coruscant during these discussions, despite tuning in from holograms. So with the vote in, they all returned. Didn't matter where they were. All 13 Jedi Masters of the High Council showed up and prepared for a risk, a moment that would define the legacy of the Jedi Order or leave it in shambles. When they approached in the morning, no one suspected a thing. The Jedi Temple locked itself down and Syndralic awaited commands from his peers. Mace Windu led the charge, with every member of the Council following behind him. All 13 members, the arguably most powerful Jedi of this generation, were here for a show of unity and strength. Palpatine wasn't expecting anything. He didn't reveal his cards and he didn't threaten anything close to Order 66, but he definitely had no reason to assume that the overly complacent Jedi Order would make a move on him this morning. It was the day of a large bill inside the Senate Rotunda. It was a pre-signing before the Republic agreed on a military expansion deal. Basically, Palpatine wanted to protect his emergency powers with a new piece of legislation that would make it easier for him to maintain an even larger military, once, of course, the expansion was approved. This bill was basically a continued means of ostracizing everyone who disagreed with him, individuals to put on the list, kill, scare, or force out of office. The Jedi didn't hesitate when they entered the chambers. Yoda watched from the outside of the room as Master Windu ignited his saber and told the Chancellor that the Clone War was coming to an end today. They were going to announce to the galaxy that Mina Bonteri was attacked and killed by Count Dooku, and that this one-sided conflict was a means to force profit into the few elite oligarchs in the galaxy, starting with Dooku. This was a war only a few could make anything off of, and Dooku was playing into that game, nothing else. Palpatine reasonably knew he couldn't take on the entire High Council at the same time. He was a powerful Sith, but not quite that powerful. Not to mention, he didn't have the executive leverage at this point to turn the people against the Jedi. However, with his capture, he would have the perfect opportunity to unite the Republic, and especially the Senate, in activating Order 66. It would be the perfect way to gain power earlier and defend the Republic from an almost emperor-like role before turning it into an empire. He let them put shackles on his hands and force him through the executive building and into a shuttle that would take him to the Senate structure. It was a little awkward, but Palpatine didn't say a word. He didn't make this obvious self-destruction any harder for the Jedi. He also loved the idea of allowing the Order to completely mess this up. The people were still semi-sympathetic to their cause, but now they were basically publicly threatening Palpatine's life. This wouldn't bode well for them in the public eye. Once they reached the Senate building and got onto the Senate pod, the Jedi recognized that they didn't have enough room to fit everyone onto the main Chancellor's pod, so half the council had to split up and take spare pods in the rotunda for this debriefing. As an added note, they were able to use the empty pod seats because of senators that left the Republic to join the Separatists. As senators filled the massive chamber, not a soul expected this. There were some individuals that were surprised by a pod filled with Mundi, Yoda, Kenobi, and a couple of other recognizable faces, but no one thought it meant anything like taking over the Chancellor's power in real time. The time till the beginning ticked down, and Palpatine, still without having said a word the entire time, decided to speak up now, and told each of the Jedi that this would cost them everything. His smile widened, and they ignored him. The counselors knew the cost, and the session began. The Chancellor's pod rose into the rotunda, meeting surprised gasps and even a couple jeers. Everyone, even those who opposed Palpatine, saw this as strictly undemocratic. The Jedi weren't even a part of that system. They were a rogue nation, a group of monks taking power that didn't belong to them into their hands. The jeers filled the Senate hall, and news droids surrounded the pods as stories broke galaxy-wide of a hostile takeover by the Jedi Order. Live feeds were started, and people were deafened by the roar of boos that were aimed at the Jedi. Schools in the core stopped their classes to tune into this historic movement. Businesses slowed. Everyday citizens watched the Republic lose power to a threat from within, a threat that had already been misconstrued within its first moments by a media controlled by the state. When the Jedi were finally given a chance to speak, shock troopers from around the city were activated and sent to the Senate building, and Senate commandos filed into the executive office beneath Palpatine's pod. Master Windu took a deep breath as he held the weight of everything on his shoulders. One wrong wording would immediately be the message taken by the galaxy. They would interpret this event as a hostile takeover, and nothing less. So Mace told the galaxy, the Senate, the people of the Republic, the truth, and nothing but it. He started with a statement. The peace treaty between the Republic and the Confederacy had been ruptured. It was deliberately ended to keep a few select people wealthy, and those same individuals in power. He iterated that Palpatine was not the target of this move. He was simply the head of state needed for it. The Jedi in this defended their actions, but also immediately proved that they had no interest in usurping the Chancellor. Mace continued expressing as the Jedi had to Palpatine before. Count Dooku was a militant oligarch, someone who demanded reform from a system that he did not actually believe in. Mace avoided any connotation to the Sith, because that wouldn't mean anything to anyone here. Instead, he relied on what people disliked, not just about Dooku, but their own system. Flaws with the Republic that constantly got distracted by Palpatine's willingness to blame anything other than the system itself. These were frustrations felt by mostly everyone. Didn't matter if they were core citizens or mid-rim migrants. They were all oppressed in one way or another. This system allowed individuals like Dooku to rise to power and force the galaxy into unending conflict. Then came the sentence that everything in this relied on. Mina Bonteri was not killed by the Republic. Not a soul in the Senate, in the executive branch, in the military, or in the Jedi Order approved of any hits on Confederate senators. Mace then did something pretty unethical. He showed a data report of every single Republic secret operation for a 3-day window around Mina's death. As an additional note, all these ops were already finished by this point, and they didn't technically reveal anything that would actively put Republic troopers in danger. As per the report showed to the galaxy, the Republic had nothing to do with her death, and thus, Mace finished this point. This is where he actually blamed Palpatine, because Windu was suggesting informally as a representative of the Republic, asking the Separatists to start the peace talks again. The Jedi were not taking power over the Republic. They had no interest in doing so. They simply wanted to stop the death, and they wanted to stop the Republic and Separatists from giving the banking clans what they wanted. Mace also revealed some other top secret information about the military expansion bill and the 50% interest rates. Not even everyone inside the Senate knew about either the rates or the commando missions, so all those jeers and angry comments simply became silence. The Republic government was exposed, and the Jedi simply finished it off by telling people that they didn't mean to harm Palpatine, but until the peace could be finalized, they'd be holding him away from the public spotlight. The pod dropped back into the Chancellor's office below the dome, and everyone was left in a stunned silence. No one knew what to say, because what do you say? How do you respond with that kind of information? The people around the Republic knew everything. Protests were immediately arranged, strikes were started, unions began discussions. Everyone who was anyone recognized that they were being played for fools, because the government figured that disunion between their constituents meant a free pass for life. But how about no? The Jedi in the Chancellor's office looked at the Senate commandos and didn't ignite their sabers. Palpatine asked for help, but even despite their sworn oath to the Republic, these commandos couldn't arrest the Jedi. Many of them had family that died in sieges, conflict that didn't need to happen. It was insinuated, not directly said to avoid all-out lying, that the Jedi had informed Palpatine about Mina's death being a Separatist operation, long before this Senate session happened. So for some of these commandos, who lost relatives or friends in the past couple of weeks, they realized that their loved ones didn't need to die. The Jedi were kind of right. That didn't mean the entire squad was willing to just let the counselors go free, but the commander of the squad disarmed any resistance and gave every single one of the 13 Jedi safe passage back to the temple, an action that would remove Palpatine and the Jedi before the Coruscant Guard fully mobilized inside the building. Across the galaxy on Sereno, Dooku's hologram buzzed every few moments. People were questioning the legitimacy of this. Many people who joined the Confederacy didn't trust the Jedi, but they also knew the Jedi. This action was not something the Order would just do by accident. It was a concentrated effort, one that they would do if they had proper evidence. It was not a power grab, and simply proved that the Jedi were willing to do the right thing, even if it looked wrong in the public eye. Dooku needed to give answers. The first few calls were easy, but then he started to mix up his stories. He messed up responses, and those lines of mix-ups were exchanged with senators who heard different things from Dooku. Long story short, about 3 to 5 hours after the Jedi display on Coruscant, an emergency session was called on Raxus for the Separatist government. No one really believed that Dooku killed Mina, but they also couldn't necessarily prove he didn't. That was the problem with having a fully mobilized droid army. They couldn't question anyone, and no one knew that Dooku worked with bounty hunters frequently. So he could have said the word, and no one would have been able to stop him, let alone know about it. However, the Separatist Senate wanted answers. Mina was confirmed killed, and the Republic was attacked immediately after. If Dooku wasn't responsible, then how could an orchestrated attack by the CIS come so quickly after her death? That had to have been in the plans for months, or known about for far longer than possible. This consumed the Confederacy, and Dooku took the brunt of hostile statements. In a means to end the war and repeat what the Republic had done, an impeachment was voted on and agreed on in that session. While it might not be sound for wartime leadership, there were 3 irrefutable truths that the Confederacy agreed to. Firstly, Dooku being removed did not remotely change their government. He was simply a voice for them, and he could be replaced. Secondly, the Republic did want peace. There was a chance for the war to come to an end, without more bloodshed. Someone was responsible for that. Thirdly, whether or not Dooku was involved, everything was a little coincidental. If the Republic or the Jedi could remove Palpatine from executive power, then they could do the same with Dooku if it meant ending the war. On this, Dooku understandably stepped down and prepared for his own contingency plan. The Sith didn't necessarily have a combined plan for a scenario like this. Neither of them really anticipated the Jedi to make a move to end the war. They also never expected the war to bog people down so quickly. War is a troubling thing for everyone, even if you profit off it. There's a morality of conflict, and it finally reached a head. The Sith together didn't anticipate that to come so soon. Dooku, though, had his own plans in the case that Palpatine lost his power in some shape or form. This plan would work if he had power or not. The droid army was aligned with him, not the Confederacy, despite their belief that it was theirs. So with General Grievous and Asajj Ventress, he mounted up a massive droid force, the largest fleet in the galaxy, and prepared to engage the Republic on Coruscant. Due to the tide of the war changing back into Republic favorability, this was a sweet period for him to strike. If Palpatine died, then he could pretty much secure himself ultimate victory. Point being though, due to the Republic pushing the CIS back, which led to the request for more battle droids, the Republic was able to disperse its core fleet. So in theory, the core should be relatively undefended from such a sizable attack. In the meantime, as the Republic reached contact with the Separatist government the following day, chaos erupted. The discussions were actually going pretty smoothly, without direct oversight from Palpatine, Dooku, or the Jedi. The Council explicitly stated that they wanted peace. They weren't going to draw up the terms, but they made sure it was easier. Despite being in the middle of this peace trial, everything came crashing down on both sides. The capital was attacked by the largest droid force seen the entire war. The defense fleet of Coruscant was capable, but it wouldn't last forever. However, due to the turmoil of the last few days, the Jedi were fully mobilized, and that was the one thing Dooku didn't really anticipate. Because of the rush towards a peace treaty, Republic High Command pulled forces back. Immediately, some of the best pilots in the entire Jedi Order launched into action with the droid force showing over Coruscant: Mace Windu, Plo Koon, Saesee Tiin, Ahsoka, and Anakin. As a side note, Skywalker wasn't very pleased with the entire situation. He wasn't even involved in the Order vote to remove Palpatine from power, but the Council, specifically Obi-Wan, kept him as uninformed as possible. Anakin was with the defense fleet when the Separatists arrived. Battleships fired everything, lines were drawn across the battlefield, flanks covered, and fighters launched. The fight for the galaxy was underway. At the same time, Adi Gallia entered the Senate building to tell everyone the circumstances. She did mention that this attack came from Grievous, noting his modified heavy Recussing class destroyer. Only a few of those were made. All of them went to Grievous. He lost one at the Battle of Seleucami, and clearly he had a new one. The Jedi rushed into the atmosphere and started the battle with the Separatists. Dogfights filled entire quadrants of the map, as the Senate decided to stay in session. There were cowards like Orn Free Taa who rushed to the Senate bunker, but individuals like Amidala held the people of the Senate in session, demanding a surrender/peace treaty. And honestly, the only reason people stayed is because they didn't want Amidala's allies creating the treaty, because many of them wouldn't like the finished product. Kind of ironic. They were so fearful for their lives, but they could return to stop someone else from creating a peace treaty because they didn't favor its terms. Above the planet, Venators got into range as the Coruscant distress signal was sent out. Even though the Republic had some forces pulled back from the front lines, like Skywalker's unit, not all of them came back to Coruscant. So there were several other fleets around the core that had to pick up and jump to the capital. So right now, this was a fight of attrition. The Republic was widely outnumbered, but the clones hammered down on their turbo lasers, pilots shredded through vulture droids, and the Jedi covered the shield generators on important vessels from hyenas. The Separatist assault was vicious. Several vessels were sent in to take the brunt of damage, so the rest and main battleships could get closer without taking any heat. Dooku gave Grievous orders to be as aggressive as possible. They had the numbers. In the meantime, Tyrannus sat inside his castle, watching the holograms as a form of entertainment. In space, Anakin trailed behind Ventress's fighter. It sped along Republic vessels and tore through their hulls with its vicious spray of firepower. Skywalker pulled across the damage and fired into the back of her ship. Two ace pilots were duking it out, and with Windu leading the main defense of the fleet, Anakin had free rein in this duel. He pulled his ship evenly behind hers and fired, but she whipped it away, spinning through debris, and he followed with ease. R2 buzzed at him, and he smiled, seeing his apprentice slip between the bridge of a Venator. Anakin fired torpedoes wide left, which forced Ventress to pull wide right, assuming that they were homing missiles. They weren't. Ahsoka shot down and saw Ventress cross her sights. Anakin would claim credit for the assist, but Ahsoka had no clue that Anakin led Asajj straight into her sights. With only a few blasts, the starfighter exploded. The Republic defense slowly crumbled, but reinforcements started showing up. Unfortunately, these forces exited from hyperspace along strong flanks. Grievous's attack was a focus down the middle blitz, an all-out straight fight to break the line and go onto the surface. The Republic buckled in the middle, but Admiral Yularen pulled his Venator around and faced Grievous's fleet alone. The Jedi and Republic vessels were able to use this moment, this sacrifice, as their chance to regroup. Yularen's Venator bared down on the Separatist flagship, forcing Grievous to stall his assault. They fought for only 5 minutes. The rest of the Separatist fleet overwhelmed the singular Venator, but it was worthwhile. Yularen's move saved the capital from an all-out invasion from the skies. Just as the Republic regrouped, Tyrannus' entertainment came to a stop. The Jedi, in anticipation that he might do something radical, sent a maniac of their own to deal with him. Pong Krell and a squad of 10 Temple Guards descended on Dooku. Magna Guards attacked the Temple Guards, and Pong led the assault on Tyrannus. With 2 huge saber staffs beating away at him, Dooku relied heavily on his skills to survive. The Jedi were able to outmatch the Magna Guards, forcing Tyrannus to challenge multiple saber pikes at the same time. Krell wasn't nearly as talented as Dooku, but he was a monstrous opponent. Perhaps in a singular one-on-one duel, Dooku would win without problem. But with more than half of the Temple Guard unit and Krell, there was never a chance. Tyrannus would not be captured. He refused, and so he died. Wouldn't change the resolve of the Confederacy, he wasn't their leader anymore, and they certainly didn't approve of his attack on Coruscant. So while the battle was ripping starships apart, the Senate utilized this unprovoked attack to gain more through the peace treaty. Everything Dooku hoped to accomplish this siege with fell apart in sequential order. His hopes for a stronger galactic government, the dreams of the Confederacy, a Dooku-led government, and the hope of wiping out the Senate and Jedi fell apart. Last to go was General Grievous. His fleet was powerful, and after Yularen's selfless maneuver, he grouped the fleet up to protect his flagship. With newly arriving Republic fleets from other core systems, they slowly but effectively surrounded him, and just pounded the fleet until everything was destroyed. The Republic refused to allow surrenders. These were battle droids. It needed to be a victory, a proof to the Separatists that no matter the odds or the numbers, they would never win. But in a way, the Confederacy would win something. The most they wanted was autonomy. They wanted to be recognized as a separate entity, because they didn't want to reintegrate back into the Republic. While the Senate didn't fully agree with it, it would be one of the major clauses in the treaty. Agreeing on the treaty may have brought the war to a ceasefire, but the signing of said treaty still needed to be done. Yeah, that would take a little more time. The battle over Coruscant was a huge morale boost to the Republic, like huge, because the capital never saw any damage on the surface. Due to the actual mission being destruction and not capturing the Chancellor, Grievous went for a full-blown assault. It resulted in total failure. Now, yeah, there was eventually damage from falling debris, but nothing came from the assault itself. But it made many wonder if the peace treaty was necessary at all. The Republic wanted the CIS Council to surrender itself over, and they were properly ostracized by the Confederacy, so it worked out. Everyone in the Confederacy just wanted the war to end, and start their own government, without Dooku and without the corporations who secretly ran their side of the war. Both sides had to contribute to reconstruction in the galaxy, but the deficit built up by the war would forever loom over the CIS. Once the treaty was signed about 2 months after the Battle of Coruscant, it would take another 5 years for the Confederacy to fully dissolve. Dooku put the government into such an unstable position that they could never financially recover from all the debts incurred from the Clone War. All that talk of autonomy cost them more than anything by the time they returned to the Republic in an overseen reintegration period. And yes, I know, I didn't forget about Palpatine. The Jedi didn't either. Palpatine was stuck in a weird place. During the Battle of Coruscant, he remained aloof, because he assumed Dooku was coming to rescue him. When that failed, he hoped that the peace treaty had gone wrong. For a man with always more than one plan, he was kept completely in the dark. He knew about the battle, but never did he learn about the peace treaty or the ceasefire. So part of him hoped that he could reclaim the Republic for himself. The other part of him attempted to seduce Jedi to the dark side to free himself. He started with one of the temple guards, but that failed. He then tried Barriss Offee when she passed by his cell, and that didn't work either. And it wasn't like he could just break out. The Council slowly became more suspicious of his relationship to Dooku, so 2 counselors and 4 temple guards watched over him almost all day. There were infrequent breaks where security was low, and they mostly thought they were being too extreme, but following an investigation into his office and finding Sith relics, lightsabers, and other documents, they just decided that they would take justice into their own hands, and they executed him. This became a problem eventually. Firstly, Anakin was not a fan of that action. Secondly, the Senate was actually planning to acquit him, so it created an entirely different problem for the Jedi Order. They also didn't say they executed him. They said he died in his sleep from age-related complications, which isn't suspicious at all, but it was pretty evident that the Jedi Council used most of their big brain power thinking for ending the war, not covering up their execution. In the end, it would blow over with some PR issues, but not enough to totally ruin the reputation of the Jedi. Remember, they just got the ball rolling on ending the war, and their suspicions about Mina Bontiri's death would come to light as truth. Dooku did murder her in cold blood, not to mention his orders to bomb the Coruscant power grid. For years, the galaxy would need to recover, but the Jedi, more than anything, understood the cost of their complacency. Their slow-to-react mantra for the past 100 years had costed lives, time, and relations to the public. They could no longer sustain their operation as such, and so they changed. They became what people needed them to be, and the temple slowly transformed into a hub of activity as it once was. The end of the Sith and the end of the war was a sign of what they needed to do for the galaxy, and as a result, as the years went by and the CIS rejoined the Republic in different ways and rebellions were put down, the Jedi Order became the face of the galaxy, the sect willing to do anything and everything to keep the people united and to end all conflict. And that, my friends, is our story. Again, special thanks to all the patrons for supporting the channel. Smash the like button. Let's talk about the story. The story is kind of complicated. It was really hard kind of figuring out how to get the Jedi to forcefully end the war. And so I kind of wanted to divide it with the first part, a little bit C-SPAN-y, a little bit mysterious, just kind of oh, how are the Jedi going to do this? And then the second part is kind of more focused on the Battle of Coruscant. And I really like the idea of kind of mixing those two. I think the Battle of Coruscant was a fun way to just kind of conclude the war. I think there is a way that the Republic could win that at that point of the war, because they were kind of pushed back, and I think they'd be pushed back just enough at that point where they could just easily group up and defend the core. And then for the Senate, I feel like the Senate could go either way on this. They would obviously be a little upset about the whole Jedi taking over thing. You know, the Jedi are taking over. But I think in the scenario, because people wanted peace to a degree, and while the Republic was really upset about the power grid bombing, I think it has to happen within a month or two of that bombing to actually go through. If the Jedi had done this a year later, and they're oh, remember that guy Mina Bontiri that got killed? She's not guy, but you know what I mean. The Senate would just be no, we don't. Who are you talking about? So I think this needed to happen really early into that, and then just being like, hey, yeah, this is probably a problem because Dooku just killed the person that was trying to end the war. Yeah, they didn't, we should get rid of Dooku. And I think that would more or less help the Republic kind of come around, because they were kind of coming around. They were going around, not a lot, but they were getting there. So I hope you all enjoyed. I love you all, spread the love, and always remember, my friends, may the Force be with you.